Good Lord.
You don't look that bad.
It look like a
You're fine, Jordan. You know, like spiffy. You got the glasses on. It looks great.
nerd.
Okay, yes. Hi, everyone. We haven't done this in a long time. I've been meaning to get back into this room. I know. It's been a wild ride this past couple months. You guys know we do this in our college. This is mostly our free time, and it's kind of crazy. It's coming to an end soon. We're about to
Hold on.
we're almost we're not there yet, but it's every since I've started this podcast back in I want to say 2023 or 2022. Back then we had a group of people who were I was a freshman, and I was one of the first people who was using the room at the time. Robert Williams was able to grace me with the privilege of using this room, and we had a big group. It's funny, to this day, some of those guys that were here for a while can tell me that a lot of the memories we had here were one of the best memories they ever had.
Oh.
Like before, aside from the clubs and other extracurricular activities they did on the campus, they said right here in this room at like 7:30 or like 2 hours of their day of a week was like the best time they had on the campus. So yeah, even you, like, I mean, granted, when you came on, you're getting the Lord down me. This is more when we were sophomores. There were a couple of people who were using the motherboard around the same time we were doing our podcast, and there were so many episodes that got cut because bad audio, or we just cut off entirely and we couldn't salvage anything. We had to delete the video, try again.
Robot voice.
Yes. One of his famous clips he ever did for this podcast has robot voice, like underwater Mario, like like
pretty
water
much.
Water
it
voice.
was like really bad.
Yeah. It's
This is the ultimatum. We had to either choose recording it or doing it live. So
Yeah. But today we got a special topic. We're not really doing, usually our thing is we just go through topic about current day events with the comic world or the anime world, or we're just discussing like certain things about like, oh, did this movie was good, or like, famously the topic I loved. I had a really big topic that I was very passionate about was, my disdain for One More Day. If you know the anime Spider-Man, the infamous One More Day, where everything changed for Peter Parker, and that was they reset the timeline. From the 90s to the 70s to the 80s, Peter was a teenager who was becoming a young man. The rising popularity of the movies and the rise of the Ultimate Universe kind of like brought a big push for Peter to be a kid again. So they ended up taking the people in charge of Marvel, instead of continuing the character and giving it an evolution, they decided to regress. So now Aunt May is alive, and Peter and Mary Jane's marriage kapoosh. And to this day, we're still recovering from that. In the ASM run, we're still trying to get back to that. But that's not. But yes. The topic is old gen versus new gen, and the reason why I say that is because we got our good friend here, Yami. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Diami Virgilio. I'm a professor of media studies at the University of Mount St. Vincent. I've had the privilege, I suppose is the word, of teaching Stephen, as well as Jordan, and a few of the other misfits that are part of this podcast community, I believe.
Yeah.
Over my time here.
Yeah. Renell was one of the students that you had. And he came in pretty early on. Well, he was on and off, but he really got into it after like a certain point. We have a bunch of good times in the podcast. But the reason why I brought you here is because like I love talking to people about their moments, their time when they got into the genre, the culture, which is like Marvel, DC. Hell, even anime, but mostly like in this context, Marvel, DC, comic book world, the nerd culture, as they say. I love hearing people's stories about that. It could be Star Wars, it could be Marvel. I recently had 2 years ago, I had I did a pod with Andrew Del Vecchio, and we were just comparing, like, he grew up with the Star Wars movies. I came in and I'm I'm 23, so all I knew was the prequels. And you know, I found out Luke was Darth Vader's son by the Lego games. Like I'm in a really weird place. Like I knew before, like I even saw the original trilogy. So yeah, and that's why I like to talk about these things, because you were, you know, when you were our age, like this was a time where I guess the culture was kind of booming, but you were aware of it before it got popular, before, you know, the mainstream took over, but before Blade, before, you know, back in like Christopher Reeve Superman or Michael Keaton Batman, like that era where it was just like, you know, dipping its toes into the genre, you know. Like I'm so curious to hear about that. If you can like talk about that experience, like what was it like being a kid to a young adult in that era of being a comic fan?
Yeah, so I guess I should say I'm in my 40s, and so I was coming up as a fan mainly in the 1980s and 90s, as a kid, of course.
Right.
Um, I think one thing I would push back on immediately is nerd. You use the word nerd.
Mm.
So
Yes.
we always made a distinction between nerds and geeks.
Yes.
First of all. Even geek was a term that we only reluctantly accepted,
Right.
but at a certain point, it at least became somewhat acceptable to use that pejorative geek and kind of reclaim it.
Right.
But there's a difference between a geek and a nerd, right? A nerd is someone who likes school. A geek is someone who likes cool things. So it's important to make that distinction right off the bat.
So it's more geek, as you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not to say I don't like school. Obviously, I'm a professor, but you know I didn't once upon a time. So the other thing I would say is it's not just that it was before it was mainstream, but really in the time that when I was growing up, a lot of this industry was in total collapse. So when we think of this Marvel and DC TV and film empire that we see today, we think of it as a sign of the success kind of these properties, right? These Marvel and DC properties. But in actuality, it's really the ashes of their failure. And it's because
wow, hot take. Yeah.
Well, in the 1990s and early 2000s, comics were in really bad shape economically.
Yes. Right.
And after a brief boom that was really brought about by the speculator craze, as people were going into comic stores to buy, you know, back issues of comics to sell them.
Speculator phase, really? What's that?
Yeah, so the speculator phase refers to this period in the 1990s. You could say it began a little sooner than that in the 1980s, when first issues became increasingly rare. Second issues actually became even rarer because usually publishers print a more limited run of issue number 2. So first issues, though, second issues, they became sort of collector's items. And as this comics retail market had grown up in the 70s and 80s, they were selling back issues of comics. And so it wasn't just that people were buying them off the newsstands anymore, but you had to go to this place called the comic store. And in these places called comic book stores, there was a thriving back issue markets where older comics were being sold at double, triple, quadruple their cover price. So maybe the original cover price was 75 cents, but people were selling these comics for like 20, 30, 100, sometimes thousands of dollars, depending on the comic.
And this is like, we're talking like back issues of like Batman, the 60s.
Batman, like things from right. So things from the Silver Age and Golden Age of comics, especially the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, because the print runs were somewhat limited. They were increasingly rare. A lot of people threw out those comics. So the collector's market was mostly oriented toward people buying old comics that their mothers and fathers had thrown out, or picking up holes in their collections, or just because a popular character had debuted in a particular issue, or an artist or writer had debuted in a particular issue. So there was this thriving resale market for back issues.
Yes.
And that led to speculation, where people started getting into comics only so they could buy them and resell them.
Wow.
So they would buy comics and put them in a bag and board, and they would keep them in a box, and they would try to keep them as a kind of store of value.
Yeah. Not to cut you off, but that is exactly what's going on with physical media, especially video games.
Right,
Now.
yeah.
Like anything from the PS2 or PS1 or
Yeah.
GameCube, anything that's like vintage and still works is some crazy prices. So it's crazy.
Yeah, physical media has always had this kind of collectability to it. I think in the past, people used to collect old magazines, baseball cards, obviously Pokemon cards, other cards,
I
right?
can understand that.
So media that has always had this kind of collectible appeal has always attracted speculators. But with the retail markets in comic book stores, there was a place for this exchange to actually take place and a place for these comics to be collected, whereas previously they had mostly only existed in conventions and things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So that speculator frenzy meant people were only buying comics, not because they wanted to read them or because they enjoyed them, but they were over purchasing them because they thought they'd be worth money.
Mm.
And then ultimately,
They didn't read the books at all.
They didn't read the books. They just
Yeah.
bagged them up and put them in a box. And that speculation led to comic book stores and retailers and comic book publishers making a lot of money as people were just buying issues to collect them. But that's only going to be sustainable for so long. There's only so much appetite for back issues. Eventually, there was more collecting going on than there realistically was a market to purchase these things, and so the whole thing collapsed. At the same time as Marvel was going through corporate issues, they were being in the midst of being acquired by various different parties, including a corporate raider from Revlon.
Mm-hmm.
So at this time, the market kind of collapsed. Marvel was forced to declare bankruptcy. DC wasn't doing much better. And
this is was this the late 80s or early 90s?
So in this period, we're into the mid to late 90s.
Okay.
When we get to this crash period.
Okay.
And so a lot of the comics at this time, it's mostly crossovers and gimmicks. They're dealing with this problem of an aging audience who's no longer kids, so they can't really get the kid market, but they don't necessarily want to admit that it's for adults only. So they don't really reorient the publishing toward the adult market. So there's a little bit of a schizophrenia in the way comics are even being marketed and presented to people.
Yeah.
So out of all this failure and market collapse and speculation comes a need to make money by any means necessary.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And so what does that mean? Licensing out comic book properties to be developed by movie companies who at that time were looking for safer bets, because when you can adapt something that's already been successful in another media, you decrease some of the risk of making a movie over it, which is why we see so many remakes these days, right?
Yeah.
Remember movie companies.
Not just comic book movies, you see, RoboCop, Jurassic, I mean, it's not the title, but like all the Jurassic Park movies that come out.
Right. Yeah. So remember, media companies are always just trying to limit their risk, and comics were a way, especially with the advent of new technologies like CGI, where it seemed somewhat practical to actually try to make these movies. Comics were a good bet. So in those early days, most of these properties were sort of auctioned off to film production studios to raise money to be able to still make the comics. Right. So in many cases, Marvel and DC were trying to keep their bottom line alive and selling away the rights to Fox and other studios. So we got some good things out of that era, right? The Tim Burton Batman films were, because now Warner was always a different story because they had their own film production studios. They were making their own products, the Christopher Reeve Superman films, the Tim Burton Batman films. But even though they had control of the product, still they could make things that were, not in alignment with what their audience wanted, as we saw as we got out of the Tim Burton era into the Joel Schumacher era.
You're saying like basically just not as comic accurate as it should be, in a way?
Well, I think it was more about the problem with reconciling the tone.
Got it.
For which audience, like, are comics for kids or are they for adults? These were the problems that were. Are they family films or are they meant to be more serious drama action movies? So this was always a concern from the earliest days. But with the Warner produced things, we knew at least that they had some creative control. And those worked out okay at first until they didn't. with Marvel, there was no real. Marvel had forays into television with things like the Incredible Hulk series. There was a Spider-Man live-action series in the 70s.
I love the
80s.
Incredible Hulk series. That's what my brother and I, it's just to talk about that era. It was for a lot of Marvel properties. This was the time where they were just, they didn't have much success with DC. But DC, even to this day, you could argue they're really scared of trying new characters. They'll hold on to Batman and Superman. Now they're just kind of like holding on to Batman, and that's their cash cow. But it's interesting to talk about that era of the 70s. Like even just like the era like the 70s, where like they were just throwing their hat at trying to make movie or TV show adaptations. Fantastic Four movie. Yeah. They had that Spider-Man movie, a Spider-Man show, a Captain America show. Yeah. I think the only one that really had any success was the Incredible Hulk show, which was, like you said, it was like, them finding the balance to, is this for kids? Is this for adults? There were a lot of, I find that show fascinating because there was a lot of pushback between the director and Stan Lee of like, okay, how do I make this real as possible, but also respecting, it's still being a guy who gets mad and turns green. He has muscles and stuff, right? So, I think even the director famously said, like, he really fought hard to turn Hulk red because he was like, oh, he's red with rage. Why is he green? But, the whole thing was like, well, he was gray before, and then he's green now. Like, you got to keep it to the comics. It's funny because I think as not as accurate as the show was at the time, this is gonna lead to another thing I was mentioning, but it kind of redefined the character for what we know now. Hulk kind of being the representing a story about abuse and more of like untapped kind of rage and taking it very seriously, which the Hulk comics would do going forward. And I think that's one of the best examples of like, a guy, a show or adaptation of a comic book being, so well regarded and well written that, it kind of just changed that comic going forward. And I think like, this is to Gentry, but going like back and forth here. But, back in the day, before the MCU, because now people forget like Iron Man and Captain America, those are B-list heroes. Yeah. And no one's like, watch the Avengers. Like, those were all like,
yeah. I would go beyond that. I would say they were C-list. I would say, the Hulk and Spider-Man historically.
Exactly, Hulk and Spider-Man, yeah.
They were the two most popular Marvel characters because of, and it was partially because they had been adopted into other properties like the TV show.
Yeah.
Spider-Man, they had Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
Before X-Men took over in the 90s.
Yeah, and so then, right, the X-Men later would take over a lot of that space. But interestingly, that even still, you could say Spider-Man and the Hulk are kind of more popular than they even became.
Right.
Except for a certain generation, my generation, really. So the Hulk is an interesting case because the show with Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno was kind of a... it was based on some of the stories that were taking place in the 70s with the Hulk just sort of always on the run.
Yes.
And I think what you were referring to later, or is how later in the 80s, really the stories after this show, the stories when Peter David takes over the writing of the character, we start to get this whole light on the Hulk having been abused, and it starts to be kind of the story about the inner child. And we can say that corresponds to a broader period of trying to make comics grow up and have accommodate that adult audience I was talking about before. Writers like Peter David who were writing the Hulk.
Frank Miller.
Yeah, well, Frank Miller is slightly before this. So we had this whole deconstruction period with people like Frank Miller and Alan Moore. But then we get to this other group of writers who are just trying to tackle more mature themes in the comics to deal with this adolescent and young adult audience that they have now.
Yeah, it wasn't a deconstruction. It was more of like, we're just going to take this story a little seriously.
And it becomes kind of I almost want to say more after school specialty in a way. But because when Peter David was writing the Hulk, he dealt with a lot of themes of the time, whether it was HIV or international conflicts or what have you.
In a Hulk comic.
Yeah. And he just passed away, sadly. Peter David, rest in peace.
Yeah.
But he gave us a lot of the modern version of the Hulk that you could say was riding on the popularity that the Hulk had gained from people knowing the character through years of that television show and having a lot of investments in Bruce Banner, not just the Hulk.
Yeah.
But as the rest of these characters moved into the films, people didn't know them. The Hulk was somewhat known. Spider-Man had been the first movie property that Marvel really bet big on. I mean, Blade preceded Spider-Man.
Which I was going to get into. The one that kind of how like I said with Incredible Hulk, kind of the show had redefined the Hulk going forward. Blade 100% with Wesley Snipes redefined that character. I think like you talk to that Blade movie now, what we know as Blade now is because of Wesley Snipes, that first movie. And it's the movie that, going back to what you said about the Marvel going bankrupt, even talk to anybody who was there on that time, even Stan Lee admitted it to himself. Wesley Snipes' Blade saved Marvel from going bankrupt. It was I don't know how much, but at least it kept them afloat before they got licensed out more characters, in the 2000s.
It definitely was a game changer for them. But believe it or not, I've never seen the Blade movies.
Me neither, actually.
I've never seen any.
Oh my God. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm a bad comic fan, but I'll tell you why. There's 3 reasons why. One is because Wesley Snipes made Halle Berry go deaf in one ear.
Oh yeah.
So later for Wesley Snipes, forever for that. Everybody knows the reason she can't hear in one ear is because he assaulted her when they were dating very early in her career. How dare you assault my beautiful queen Halle Berry? Later for you, Wesley Snipes, in every movie that you're in. So that's number 1. Number 2, I never saw Blade because in the comics, Blade was like the corniest character possible. He was like one of these blaxploitation characters that really I found personally somewhat ridiculous and offensive because he came out during that 1970s era when a lot of these white creators were creating black characters in ways that really skirted the line of bad parody, if not outright exploitation. So I was never into Blade as a character. I've never really also been into like vampire stories or anything related to that, so I also wasn't really interested in that whole arc. And so because of those 3 things, later for Wesley Snipes, later for blaxploitation characters, and later for vampires, I never saw these films.
Yeah, so you probably hate Twilight, is what I'm saying. You've never seen it. That's it. Yeah, no, I haven't either. Well, I did watch part of it, but that was just for a friend. But yes.
So Jordan, you seem to have some opposing thoughts.
I was about to say.
When I was younger, besides like watching like a lot of like Marvel movies that apparently like not enough of the new generation has watched, like OG Iron Man, like Captain America. Like I ended up watching Blade like a little bit after it came out, but like not too much I can recall it. It was just a thing of I loved that movie, especially because like not necessarily not seeing a black like superhero, but like I don't know, it was just cool. It was funny, and I liked it when I was younger. And,
it's cool.
I'm not saying anything on you haven't seen it. It's more on the fact of that and oh my God, cool guy with swords. This guy's funny. Like these are some of the ideas that I had when I was younger, and I'm not saying I'm not a huge Marvel fan. I more like got like my upbringing from DC, but it was just like seeing like a lot of the Marvel movies, reading a lot of the like Marvel comics when I was younger.
Quick question: was it DC animation that would be more into when you were a kid?
Give or take, because my uncle had a lot of like DC magazines that he just gave, like DC and like DC magazines and comics that he just gave me when I was younger, and like. Mind you, I'm like not even 10. He just gave these to me because he wanted to get them out of his house, and he had a lot of them. So it's me like finding out about Batman, finding out about Green Lantern, some of the stuff, and it was just like, this is really cool. Like that, and like, how do you put it? It's gonna sound so stupid. The game Injustice.
Oh,
like,
yes.
That's
yes.
what really like put me on like the DC-ish, and
Talk
it was
about defining a generation.
It was really cool, especially like not only just having all this DC, but like this is why I'm like more DC than Marvel in a sense. Because I've watched a lot of the Marvel movies. Yes, I've watched the 2012 like Avengers movie,
one,
but like besides like reading the comics, seeing the comics, and like playing like Injustice, though, that was like the reason I like DC, but not necessarily hate Marvel. I just
okay. It's a preference.
Injustice is like everything that I think is wrong.
Yes, thank you.
Oh my.
This one game, this one story is the reason why we have all these evil Superman variants.
Yeah.
Wait, I was about to
10
say
years of that. Oh my god.
Because I'm curious.
So even Superman was evil for a bit. Even
because there was a story like animated.
Yes.
About like Superman eating evil prior to Injustice.
It was usually Elseworlds. I mean, well, Injustice is an Elseworld story, but that was like the first time we saw in a big scale where it was like, because the game was, they say it straight up, it's Elseworlds.
Yeah.
But the comic was like, they didn't. It was like, oh, here's a story that's happened. It's like, like not like the main runs, but like a run of like, for example, Batman Ego, Long Halloween. Those are not like runs of the Batman comic. They're more of like your standalone issues. So Injustice was kind of similar to that. Like, what would the world look like if Superman just lost his shit? And people really liked that because it wouldn't stop doing it.
Like, I can't even say anything because as a child, I loved that shit. I bought like Injustice 2 when it came out because of that. And I like the story that follows it, even though like there's like a lot of Superman evil variants. But like, I just like it because I just like it because they pushed, what is it?
This is why we have fascism. Okay.
God's among us.
Let me tell you why I'm saying this. Because
I agree.
You didn't grow up with Superman as the good guy. And that is why we have fascism.
Yeah. And either you didn't grow up with him as a good guy, or you thought he was boring. And that's why you love him.
It's not that I thought he was boring.
No.
But those are like the two poles.
Two poles,
one can be part of. Either
Yeah.
Superman is whack or oh wow, look when he is unleashed. Look what he can really be. And those are like the two poles that we've had to deal with for the last 10 years, 15 years.
It's iffy because it's like 9 times out of 10, we don't really get to understand varying Superman like in his entirety.
Yes.
And I just say this because of a lot of portraying is him being bad, we see all of it, but we don't, at least I haven't seen all of it in like when he's not being portrayed as an evil variant.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
So I want to just qualify what I'm saying here, which is that, I could go into a long rant on this, but I'll try to restrain a little of what I mean here. Superman is ideally meant to represent what is someone with absolute power who just devotes himself to virtue,
Yes.
to helping people, to helping others his primary, reason to be.
Yes.
Unfortunately, since the 1980s, where we've been sort of deconstructing our superheroes, what we want to know is what if somebody with that kind of power got out of control? Now, these are questions that other creators, the first creator really to ask this question about a Superman-like character was this guy, Mark Gruenwald, who did this comic called Squadron Supreme, which was like a Justice League analog that Marvel actually published. There was a character called Hyperion, who was a Superman analog, and he was sort of the out-of-control Superman. You could say somewhat in the comic Watchmen, we're kind of asking this question with Dr. Manhattan, with Superman again in a way in Dark Knight Returns. So during this whole period of deconstruction, we're getting people say, what if these characters lost control? Because we're also dealing with a society where we're seeing absolute power corrupts absolutely, right?
Yeah.
As countries are becoming more powerful, that power is not necessarily always being used in a virtuous manner. And so in a way, comics are trying to comment on that, right?
Yes.
But fans maybe miss that nuance of this being a commentary on society and just fell in love with the idea of, whoa, what if this guy with all these powers was going ham and just like wrecking everything?
Yeah.
And so that's
cool.
Superman. Yeah, so it's like, so then Superman ceases to be about virtue and then just becomes about power set.
Right.
And then it's like, what if this power set was unleashed on the world? And what if power, in fact, had no restraints?
Yes.
And what would that look like? And isn't that a little bit cool? And so it's no coincidence that we're living in that very world now, where power is trying to act without restraint, without limit, and say, isn't that cool? But it's not that cool, as we have found out. So that's why I say this is why there's fascism. I could go into more detail about I'll spare you. Yeah. But it's just it's the fact it's sad to me in a way, and I'm not even the biggest Superman lover. I thought he was corny at different times in my life too.
Yeah.
But I do think it's sad that for a generation, he should be the Superman that you met in Justice League Unlimited. He should be the Superman that you met in Superman for All Seasons or one of these other
animated
series.
I think I know the animated series.
Yeah, but instead it's like people mostly know him as like this kid who lost his mind because his girl got blown up.
That's literally the story.
That was it. That was the entire. He kills everybody because of that one death. So to go into my kind of experience growing up in comics and stuff like that, just to talk a little bit about Superman real quick. I thought there was a period in my time where I thought Superman was whack. I didn't feel that way when I was a kid. I actually because this was right when Returns came out. It was for a kid it's like, wow, that's cool, but then you're like, for the other stuff. But you're like, oh, you're awake for the cool stuff when he's lifting and flying and stuff. But I did like Superman for a change. But then, of course, I came out the womb a Spider-Man fan. Like I've always been my thing.
Oh well.
I was since the dawn of 2002, same year, like Stanley, same birthday. Come on, like it's been in my birth. It's in my birthright. But yeah, I've always been a Spider-Man ride or die, and Batman too. There was a point in time where I did, I kind of liked the Injustice games, and I was like, oh, this is really. I was that kid. I was like, wow, I really enjoyed the evil Superman, and if he was wrecking stuff. Now I can't stand it because I think. I feel like every kid or in point in their life where they find that Superman needed, and they're like, oh, I get it now. There's that point in time where like people are like, oh, I see what they're doing. If it's not the Christopher Reeves Superman, for me it was Smallville. I was like, got it, Smallville. Tom Welling, Michael Rosenbaum, one of the two best actors playing those characters. They completely nailed it.
I would say definitely the best Lex.
Oh my God, I love Michael Rosenbaum, best Lex. So I didn't grew up with that. My brother did for a change when he was watching reruns. I ended up watching this way later in life when I was in high school, when I already dabbled in CW with the Flash and at Arrow, and I was like, let me see where this actually began for the thing. And I'm like, oh, Smallville. I wrote good things about Smallville. Became one of my favorite series of all time. I watched all 10 seasons. I would lose the free trial Hulu, get it back, keep watching, keep watching again. It would be like one period of time where I'm like, all right, I think it's good now. We can go back to the free trial and make a new account. But it's which I'm actually pretty happy about now. It's I have my problems with the new Superman film, but I am really happy that there's a generation now that actually kind of okay, this is how it's supposed to be, because we've had so much of the wrong thing for a while. But anyway,
I'll tell you.
I
haven't watched the news. Been wanting to, just haven't.
I would say if you want to see the best recent version of Superman, watch Superman and Lois.
Yes.
The New Adventures of Superman.
Oh,
the show.
I've already seen it.
Yeah.
I've already watched 2 seasons of that. That show is actually really good.
And that nails the essence that we're talking about, sort of Superman. And the tone is good. if you're a anime fan, it has more of
Isn't
that
that
art
on
style.
Max?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
It should be on Max.
And it has that art style that's more like, if you're more familiar to anime fans, I think. But I think that shows that real spirit that we're talking about of the character in a way that is missing, I think.
Yeah, I think another one is the animated movie that came out around the 2000s or 2010s. It's the movie adaptation of What's Wrong with Truth, Justice, and the American Way.
Oh, yeah.
That's a great one too as well. If you want to like get good Superman, like what Superman is about, that movie. But to be honest, like my experience getting into comics, I grew up in the Edge era. And this was 2000s. I mean, all I had was the Marvel movies. I remember watching Fantastic Four and Spider-Man 1. Didn't even know the difference between them. Like I have fragments of my memory where I'm like, I would think about Spider-Man. Like I'm watching a Spider-Man movie, and then it would turn into, and then the channel would flip, and it'd be like Chris Evans' Human Torch just like turning on his head in flames. So that was my very earliest experiences with the character, with Marvel or comic book characters. I wouldn't get into comics until like a little more into 15, 16 or like 13 years old, because I was just my only ever experience to any of these things, comic book culture, was the MCU movies. It was Iron Man 1, and from that point on, I was Ride or Die Hulk, Incredible Hulk 2008. I love that movie. I watched all of them. I was that guy who sat in that theater for every single MCU movie. But even then, I sat in the theater for every Spider-Man movie. I don't remember watching Spider-Man 1 or 2 in theaters, but I do remember watching 3 in theaters. That was like, and I was obsessed. You couldn't get me out of a black suit Spider-Man costume. Like, you had to rip it off.
I'm sorry, that was the first one you saw.
I know, right? And it's good. It's not as good as the first two, but there's some stuff to love about it. But what I mean that I grew up in the Edge era, because this is the era of the Ultimate Universe. The era, well, not even just the Ultimate Universe. This was the era of comic books where they're like, okay, we're in the modern world now. All right, see you, man. Thanks.
No problem.
We're in the modern world. We need to reinvent these characters in a more modern sense. So now you got Ultimate Universe in the Marvel, and then you got DC Comics Earth 1 universe, where now we got a Batman who is, just a brawler with no tights, no underwear. And we got Superman who is he's just straight up small little Superman, ripped straight out of the show. I'm not much familiar with the Earth 1 comics, but Ultimate I do. And that was a weird time. I much prefer the Avengers movies, which, talk in a second. But for someone who was reading the Ultimate Universe, I can say now, if the only good run of that universe was the Spider-Man run. Because a lot of Ultimate X-Men, again, they were trying to do this new thing of like, we need to make this grounded, and every character is the Punisher. They need to be dark, edgy, and swear all the time. And it turned into a caricature at a certain point. I think what you see, the Blob eating the Wasp, Logan pushing Charles Xavier downstairs. It was a weird.
That comes later. I mean, I think when the Ultimate Universe first launched, it was again out of failure, right? You could say that.
Yeah.
What had happened really was Marvel was struggling for some time. They turned to a number of experiments during that time.
Yeah.
And one of the experiments was that they did this line called Marvel Knights.
Yes.
And Marvel Knights was, where they sort of rebranded Daredevil and the Punisher and Black Panther and Black Widow, actually all characters who ended up later being pretty important to their cinematic universe and some of the stories they did. But the editor, what was important was that the editors of that project were Joe Quesada and Jimmy
Joe
Palmiotti.
Quesada, yeah.
And those two guys who had been art partners, Joe Quesada was a penciler and Jimmy Palmiotti was an inker. And they partnered up to be editors in this case, and they brought in this other talent. And it was like one of these experiments that Marvel did that actually worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
And so Joe Quesada ended up being later named the editor-in-chief of Marvel.
Mm.
And at the time, there was this other guy, Bill Jemis, I think is his name, who was the publisher.
Yeah. And he was the guy, I think Quesada was the one who made the change.
Well, Quesada and Bill Jemis, they were the ones who came up with this Ultimate Universe, which was another kind of like relaunch type.
I was just saying that I think he was also the guy who put the red button on One More Day for the ASM run.
Oh yeah, he did a lot of things that were crazy and terrible. Like, in fact, he, I believe, was the one who was just like obsessed with this idea that Peter Parker and Mary Jane shouldn't be together anymore.
Yes.
I believe that was him.
Yep.
And it was him, he was the one who was trying to come up with ways or excuses to break them up because he had this idea that Peter Parker would be more appealing as this like swinging single.
Bachelor, because that's what it was in the 70s when he was a kid.
But
70s,
it's like the two people with too much power. It was like Bill Jemis. I think that was him who had the breakup idea, and then over at DC it was like Dan Didio and him wanting to kill Nightwing.
Oh my God! Wow, I forgot about that.
It's like these guys accumulated so much power in comics with such bad ideas as like their core idea, and deeply unpopular ideas.
Leave my mark on the world.
Yeah. But anyway, when the Ultimate line launched, it was seen as a way to bring back younger readers who remember they were kind of lost. It was a way to introduce at least adolescents to these characters for the first time.
Yeah. You can start from number one now.
Yeah,
you have to go back. Yeah.
Right. And I agree with you. Ultimate Spider-Man was probably the best of that group because Brian Michael Bendis, who had come out of that Marvel Knights line. That was why one of the reasons I mentioned him. He had sort of made his mark in the mainstream because he had written Daredevil during that first Marvel Knights run for Joe Quesada. And that was how he ended up getting the gig to write Ultimate Spider-Man. He was one of a few different writers who I believe had worked on Daredevil. It was like Kevin Smith, and it was Ed Brubaker, and David Mack, a few of these guys.
I always, it shocks me, that Kevin Smith actually was like around and did the comic books because I always knew him as like the guy who loved these characters, but never really got to write. And I recently found out that he was in Marvel Comics writing some stuff. I was like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think actually I might be. I don't know if I have my chronology right. Brian Michael Bendis might have been doing Daredevil and Ultimate Spider-Man at the same time. I don't really remember, but I do know that
he did appear in the comic Daredevil.
Well, he was writing Daredevil for a long time, and he had a great run on the character. But I just don't remember if that came before or after he started Ultimate Spider-Man. Either way, Joe Quesada picked him up. He was part of this community of indie comic creators who were out there doing interesting work and wanted to get into the mainstream. And he had done a lot of popular indie work. And when he came over to Marvel, he had a sort of fresh take on dialogue that was very much inspired by playwrights like David Mamet and others. And so, what he brought to the character was basically the remix of everything, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko had done, which is the only knock on that series. He didn't do anything original. He just kind of like remade everything he did, but he did it in a good way. I thought he deserved his props. I thought he did a good job of what the assignment was, which was introduce this character to a whole new generation. Mark Millar did the Ultimate X-Men, I think, and the Ultimates, which started out fine, but they did get a little grim and gritty in the end. But all of these things that you're bringing up that are like the beginning of your time, for us as a fan who came from the time before, these were all signs of failure.
Really?
These were all signs that the industry is like it's like at any day the whole thing is probably going to collapse and we're not going to have comics anymore. Maybe this is what we thought.
Wow.
Maybe comics are going to stop being published. Maybe somebody else is going to buy them and do whatever with them. We had no idea.
Yeah.
The ultimate line was seen like they're just trying to throw whatever against the wall and see what sticks. But really, the Ultimate line ended up influencing a lot of the way the characters are portrayed in Ultimate X-Men and the Ultimates in Ultimate Spider-Man. That's pretty much the version that they brought into the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yes.
Like the Ultimates as characters are pretty much the Avengers in the MCU.
Yeah, I was gonna say this too. The Ultimate Universe in a way is inspired by the MCU is inspired by the Ultimate Universe, but not by technicality because I think, and it's a hot take, not really a hot take. I've heard people talk about this. I think, in my opinion, the real blueprint for the MCU was the Ultimate Avengers movies, the duology. Mm-hmm. Those movies took what the Ultimate Comics set up and just took some stuff that might be a little bit offensive, like streamlined it and just made it more. They kept the concept of what the Ultimate Universe was trying to do, and still made it the characters. It wasn't like a reinvention of it. It was still Captain America. If you could put them side by side, it'd be different people. It'd be different. It looked different, but the character is the same. 616 Cap is the same as was it 099 or Ultimate? 1616 Captain America. They were the same person in these two movies. Specifically Captain America, Tony Stark. Even I think the only one who had a big change was Giant Man, which it was Ant-Man, but yeah, he was more of a aggressive person, But in a way, it was kind of like, oh, this guy becomes Yellow Jacket later, so it was like, oh, leading up to that.
Is that Mighty Avengers that you're talking about?
No, this is Ultimate Avengers. This is a movie that was based on the Ultimate Comics, but kept the whimsical 616 theme and spirit in them. But it was the Ultimate Universe, but just it wrapped around a story that was made for 616, the 616 versions of the characters. For Bruce Banner and Tony Stark, it was already based on he changed as a black man. Nick Fury. Right. Hulk being a super soldier instead of just he was a guy who was trying to get stronger. Gamma ray bomb. No, he was a failed experiment of trying to recreate the super soldier, just like the Ultimate Comics. Same thing with the MCU. So it's like,
yeah. So probably when that came out, the film, because even when the Ultimate Universe came out, you could say the films were being talked about.
Yes.
Right. And or the idea of making films was being talked about.
Yeah.
You could say that in a way, what the Ultimate Universe did was make the characters more Hollywood ready.
Yes.
I remember at that time there was a lot of talk, because properties had already been optioned off. There was a lot of talk about what being Hollywood ready looked like for comic characters.
Yeah,
there was this guy.
Scrapped it.
There was a studio called Platinum Studios that used to specialize in helping comics.
That's the blueprint for the MCU.
Oh yeah. Sure. I remember these movies. These films came out sort of simultaneously.
Yeah, it was interesting.
As these things were being developed.
Yeah, Kevin Feige.
Because this came out just shortly before Iron Man, right?
Yeah, very good. So it's like, especially with Captain America and the Hulk, big inspirations. Not so much Thor.
I think the thing about those movies though was those were like commercials for the MCU. You can almost think of.
Yeah.
True. It's like that. By the time they got to those things, like the MCU was already
starting.
It was like already planned. It was already like the blueprint was kind of there. And, again, the move was to take things from these Ultimate properties and make them. But, again, as a fan growing up at that time, I was just like, here goes another gimmick that's probably going to fail. And then that's it. It's a wrap. The other thing that was that, and this is where the main generational divide between us will come.
Yeah.
There was this other thing that was like a tidal wave. And it was like we weren't really paying attention to it at the time. People like me were so worried about the fates of our precious Western comics. and we didn't even notice that there was this like juggernaut that was taking over all of the attention and interest
Oh yeah.
of younger kids.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly comics with superheroes in them were not as relevant anymore. And that was manga and anime.
Yep.
Especially with Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z, as they became very popular among young children, younger people who are now millennials, right? Those folks were some of the first generations to really eat those things up, you know. And I mean, my generation had been exposed to anime and manga before, but very specific things. You know, it was like only the best stuff possible often made it to us because that was all that was getting translated.
Was any like JoJo's Detective Conan, Fist of North Star, that kind of thing?
I mean, the things that I remember being translated into English were things like Lone Wolf and Cub, like Akira, some of Yoshihiro Tatsumi's work, later by independent comic publishers. There was some of Osamu Tezuka's work, and I think Vagabond was another one that had been translated. So there were a lot of the manga that we were getting was more sort of like the samurai fiction. And Frank Miller had kind of introduced a lot of folks to that because he had an affinity for Lone Wolf and Cub specifically. But anime had also trickled over slowly.
Very slowly, but
mostly the more risque anime I feel like was popular because we were like teenagers and it was horny. We were horny teenagers, so any nudity. So these showed these movies like La Blue Girl and Ninja Scroll and Fatal Fury. We were all watching them not because of the plot. But those movies actually were, thinking back on them, pretty sophisticated plots and characterization compared to the anime that would become
even the so-called mainstream stuff. They still had a lot of provocative things to keep the attention. Because again, it's just like comic books for them in Japan. There's like that's their comic book, and they're same thing. I think there were. It's interesting just to like real quick talk about manga. I love it's the dichotomy of like. We constantly go back and forth from this discussion a lot of like, are comic books made for kids or comic books made for adults? What's a happy medium? Is there a happy medium? And then there's always manga somehow has found a way, which I think is kind of the reason why one of the many reasons it's taken over is because, the biggest reason I can say is just the hey, if you want to start this story, start from chapter 1. That was the biggest thing. It's always been the biggest thing about comic books. Why it's hard to get into. But that was one thing that manga had on its side with that, the advantage. But more than anything, it was the variety where this story is made for kids, but this story is made for adults. I don't think there was ever a objective discussion of like, this is made for kids. No, you can choose. You have their option. Like, no, this isn't made for kids. This is made for adults, and this is made for rom-coms, for everybody. For example, Shonen Jump, to this day, their motto is like, hey, we make stories for 15-year-old boys. Dragon Ball Z was the biggest one. Fist of North Star, JoJo's, stuff like that. And then, you had Seinen, which would get more real, get more melancholic and more dramatic and richer storytelling would be, you would go to Seinen. If you were like, okay, I'll dabble Seinen, I want to try something more mature, boom, you hit Seinen stories. And there's a variety of Seinen stories that would go in and you can try. My favorite story of all time, which I herald, is like one of the best stories ever made in pen to paper, is Berserk. Berserk is one of my favorite stories of all time. But if you talk about the big three of like Seinen, because there's a big three of like Shonen Jump, like Dragon Ball, Bleach, Luffy, like One Piece. For Seinen, if you want adult storytelling, it would be Berserk, Vagabond, or a new series, relatively recent, not as old as Vagabond or Berserk, more recent, Vinland Saga. which is, again, it's a story about a wandering soldier Viking. The synopsis: wandering soldier Viking who has killed so many people and just wants to find peace. And and this is early Viking era where there's nothing but rape and pillaging. So there's a lot of of trying to hope, finding a better world, choosing nonviolence in a world that is full of nothing but violence and death. Stories like that you would find and seen in manga. And then if you want the pew 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 pew, you would go back to shonen stuff. They'll hit you with a really big sword and stuff like that. So that's the variety, I would say.
Well, I'm gonna highly recommend you read Lone Wolf and Cub if you hadn't yet.
Okay.
Because I think it's a masterpiece. It was the first manga that I read in its entirety, all the volumes. And it's just well told. I think Kazuo Koike, the author, is it's just great.
Yeah.
But it's really also the art. So I think highly recommend that series.
Okay. Yeah, I'll give it a watch.
I think the other thing though that I would say is,
can I ask you, how did you feel about the discussion when you were during that time of
well, yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Okay,
I think the thing that I would say is that comics in Japan had a slightly different evolution. They were, accepted and appreciated as a viable art form for people of all ages many years ago. And we didn't allow comics to really grow up in America.
We did, yeah.
I think it was partly because of the 1950s sort of panic that happened around comics, that strangled their potential here in the United States.
50s, what happened then?
Congressional hearings, people putting piles of comics together and burning them because they believed that comics were corrupting children. And there was this guy by the name of Frederick Wortham who wrote this book called Seduction of the Innocent, which was all about how comics, like people have talked about with many other media, were driving juvenile delinquency, or making people have bad mental health outcomes. Basically all the things that you hear about, everything from film to video games to everything else. We always have this think of the children moment when it comes to media, but because comics were specifically targeted to children, it was more of a problem. In those days, EC horror comics were a little more extreme. They were showing crime fiction and things like that, and horror stories, stories about drug use, things that were going on in the 50s, But people didn't like that. So they clamped down and they said, this is what is destroying our kids today. And it led to proposals to regulate comics, which is why we had for many years this little seal that had to be on every comic that was distributed called the Comics Code, approved by the Comics Code Authority.
Yeah.
And so the Comics Code Authority is this group of, this interest group of people who wanted to sort of morally regulate comics, also appointed by people in the comics industry that would basically, every time a comic was about to be published, they'd review it and they would either approve it or say, well, you got to make some changes to this. This is a little too adult. And
this is the 80s, 70s?
This is from the 1950s up until the Comics Code was on every comic up until the 2000s.
And this is it's funny you mentioned that, because nowadays you'd have DC's best-selling books are the Black Label stuff.
Right.
It's wow.
Right. But that was why there was always sort of this tension, because of that era where there was this crackdown on comics.
Yeah.
And there was this heavy push to morally regulate them that really ended up censoring a lot of creators. I mean, there were times in the 1970s and 80s where comic book creators would have their comics taken off the shelves, pulped before they could go to the printer. This is why the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund was founded, to really defend creators who were constantly under attack for the stuff that they were creating, because of this kind of moral policing. And so because of that, we decided as a society, you could say, America decided as a society that it didn't want comics to grow up. And it wasn't really until the experiments in the 1980s with the Forum that were releasing comics where they didn't have the Comics Code approval,
Right.
that you started to see a little change. DC released their Vertigo line, which was for mature readers only. So the way it worked, you could label it for mature readers, but we didn't want comics for adults. We wanted them to be for kids only. Japan didn't take that tack. Neither did Europe. They also had a tradition of adults reading comics. But here in America, we have Peter Pan syndrome, and so we want to preserve childhood often at any costs.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with preserving the sanctity of childhood, but
yeah, I think we're a little too obsessed with that, because I think a similar conversation happened when there's always a new show that's very popular, and the character does crazy, stupid things. Like, it's poisoning our youth. Like, SpongeBob was my era of that. Yeah, it's funny. They're like, oh, SpongeBob makes you stupid. And I'm like, well, I mean, it's a cartoon. I mean, I wouldn't say it makes you stupid, but that's a very broad term, because every cartoon is made for kids. And
I think that show is low key brilliant.
Yeah.
I think anyone who says it's stupid.
Yeah, I think, well, this is 2010.
Yeah, right.
SpongeBob. This is not the SpongeBob that was like early 2000, where it was like Steven Spielberg. This is the writers like hitting every note. All the amazing jokes with.
Well, sometimes though, even though things are dumb, they can be smart.
Exactly.
One of the great creators of our time, Mike Judge, who created some great movies. You would have never known that he was capable of such brilliance from watching Beavis and Butthead, which was like how he was really introduced to all of us. But even there, he was doing something more subtle. I think with comics, creators have had to resort to more subtle approaches to try to get more adult themes across over the years. And they've done so. Within the constraints of the Comics Code Authority, a lot of very mature stories were produced. In a way, now in the Injustice era, where it's like Injustice never would have been approved by the Comics Code Authority,
Never.
For example.
Never. Yeah,
but in a world where without limits, you can say everything is injustice. It's like every story is, how can we corrupt the good to turn them to the dark side?
Right. I mean, that's why Spider-Man's favorite story people love to do is the Black Suit Saga. It's like, oh, our good guy is turning into a bad guy. It sells a lot.
I know, but I hate that too, because I love that costume. I hate that costume has to be something that makes him bad, because I as a kid, I grew up with that Spider-Man.
Yeah.
So when I first started reading comics, I was like 7, and Spider-Man had the black costume.
Yeah.
Secret Wars had just happened. I desperately went to the comic store to buy Secret Wars number 8 so I could see how he got this costume. These were. So I love that costume. It's still my favorite Spider-Man costume over all costumes, and I hate that it has to be this freaking alien.
It's funny because we talk about comic accuracy. Yeah, we talk about comic accuracy, and it's like, I think a lot of going back to we redefining a thing, redefining a comic book story for millennia. I think the animated series for Spider-Man, because there's a lot of things like with series, especially cartoons, they take from the comics, streamline it to make, there's some things that comics do, especially in that time, was a little too goofy. So let's take these parts, let's get rid of these parts, we'll keep the main, at least the characters the same. The main beats of the characters got to be the same. I think Spider-Man, the animated series, did this well, and I think it's funny because this is every single version of the Black Suit Symbiote saga takes from this one show. It's none of these depictions are comic accurate. The symbiote wasn't even a concept until way after Battle World, when Todd McFarlane first took over, and that's when he introduced the black suit, but even then, the whole rating of it, you want to go back to the red suit and create a new character, black suit. But even then, you could make the argument that it was Peter's doing of his own, because Peter, like I said, to McGuire, we kind of like, again, redefining, we think Peter is like, he can do no wrong. He's as innocent as Superman. Peter, in comic book accuracy, he is not that at all. I mean, he was just he's a great guy with a good heart, but he has a lot of fire to him. He's got temper, you know. He's got a.
He could be kind of a jerk sometimes.
Absolutely, yeah. Like with the Fantastic Four, he tells them to go.
Yeah.
I'm very, very mean to them for some reason. I mean, Johnny deserves it, but you know. But you know, it was a lot of his explosive temper that got him in situations sometimes in the early comics, and even when the Black Suit took over, you know, the famous thing that the anime series took from, and the Spider-Man 3 movie took from, was that, you know, Peter, he's giving into his anger, he almost kills somebody, he's like, I gotta take this costume off, and then he hits the bell, it's weak to sound, and he, you know, the symbiote goes away and lands at Eddie. In the comic book, it doesn't do that. Actually, it's still ringing, and you know, it's gonna, that loud, and Peter's unconscious, it's going to affect his hearing, and he's probably going to die from it. So the symbiote itself is actually a good guy. The symbiote, it doesn't have any characteristics. It just wants to better Peter's life because it's its host. Like, anything I can do to make Peter's life better because he is my host, I'll do that. So that you get the story.
GPT.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, that's why.
It's to you constantly.
It's like, I'll go out and I'll do missions with him while he's asleep and stuff. So the reason why I brought that up is because in every adaptation you see the symbiote. I'm ruined. No, I'll get you, Peter, and then I'll go to Eddie and get revenge on you. The suit only takes the emotions of the host. So basically, it's kind of like you know, Captain America and Captain America First Adventure was like, what becomes bad becomes worse, what becomes good becomes better, like you know, like that kind of thing. So the symbiote actually saved Peter during that time when instead of running away and latching on to Eddie like in the animated series and going forward, the suit actually grabs Peter and saves him from dying from the giant frequency vibration sounds of the giant tower bell, and takes him to safety. And then, you know, of course, I just got heartbroken, so he just goes on and tries to find a new host. And then latches on to Eddie, who is filled with all this rage of Peter,
right,
Spider-Man.
Because of his poor photography skills.
Yeah, you know, he's built like a rock.
He's like this jacked bodybuilder, which Topher Grace was not.
Spider-Man. He did his best. Yeah.
You know, it's funny because all of that lore sort of makes me think of the bad times, because it's like I say, I grew up with Spider-Man with the black costume. As you say, there was none of that explanation. He went to Battle World, he gets this like pearl, it turns into the costume.
Yeah. Oh, my suit's ripped. Oh
yeah, right. There's no symbiote explanation. It's none of that, right? He just has this cool black costume. And when I first started reading Spider-Man, I was like, oh, he looks like a spider. It makes sense, right? Like, I mean, I had seen him before, obviously, but I was like 7. So seeing that new costume, I thought was so cool. And just also the way he was being drawn at the time. But the other thing is, at that time in the 80s, Spider-Man was like a very grounded street level hero.
Yes.
And a lot of the stuff that he was getting into was like street level stuff. I remember there was a story arc called Gang War that Christopher Priest wrote at the time, where he was like getting involved in like the Kingpin had been deposed over in the Daredevil comics, and Spider-Man's trying to deal with cleaning up New York, or dealing with the aftermath of a Kingpin-less New York City. So it was like street level stuff like this. It's like him dealing with this other gang that comes to try to take over now that the Kingpin's gone, the Lobo brothers, who are like these werewolves. So it's all of this stuff during this period in the 80s. And I like that Spider-Man. He's also dealing with having a job, which he can't hold down ever really successfully. Yeah. He and Mary Jane are kind of back and forth. He's with Black Cat for a while.
Huge troubles.
And so, you know, that's why I wanted to come to New York City.
Really?
If I'm being honest. When I was a kid, you know, I grew up in upstate New York. And
where?
Poughkeepsie.
Oh, wow.
And I remember the first comic store I went to was to get, up in Poughkeepsie, the first time I ever went to a comic store was to get Secret Wars #8.
Wow. Wow.
So that I could, have the issue where this happened. And it had just come out maybe a couple months before. But the thing was, they started moving Spider-Man toward these more and more fantastical adventures. They got away from the street level stuff. They gave him cosmic powers at one point. They did all this other stuff with him, and it was just like,
cosmic Spider-Man.
And then the whole symbiote story with Venom and everything. Like, I wasn't crazy about all that when it was going down. I thought Todd McFarlane was a gifted artist, but I thought the stories he was plotting, and I thought Dave Michelinie as a writer was, iffy. So I just felt like Spider-Man was falling off at that time. Like, that's how I felt as a fan, even though that was kind of like a legendary period for other people.
Yeah.
To me, that was like the fall off. Because before that, there have been great stories like Craven's Last Hunt, which I mentioned, where he was in that black costume.
Yeah.
And so that was like the fall off, and things were getting more about the art. And that was when the speculators came in, because it was mostly the art interest that was driving the speculation.
Yeah.
It wasn't about stories anymore. Suddenly it was about, oh, you have this really cool artist's work. Let's buy it. I want to buy that issue. I want to buy 100 copies of that issue because it's Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man 300, So I wasn't into that whole thing. I wasn't into that whole move. And that was actually when I started to shift my own interest more toward X-Men. And, eventually from X-Men into Vertigo and more grown-up sort of comics. But the X-Men are forgotten now. Maybe they'll be back soon. Maybe they'll be back at the end of this year when the Wolverine game comes out. And then we're going to have to deal with a bunch of Wolverine stands.
Yeah, we definitely will. 100%. I can guarantee that. I don't think we're going to see the X-Men officially until the end of Secret Wars. Then when that whole reboot comes out.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
The movie.
Because I think they're setting up Jean Grey, a young Jean Grey in the new Spider-Man film.
Yeah, that's what folks think Sadie Sink is playing.
Yeah. Because we were like, that's not playing Mary Jane. Like, what are you talking about? Like, no, she's not playing Mary Jane. But yeah, we don't. Again, I think it's a speculation, but because they've been trying to incorporate the X-Men for a while, they even did it in Humans. Sorry, not in Humans. They did it in Miss Marvel.
Miss Marvel,
yeah. All we had was it was a story about Inhumans, and it was like, no. It felt like a mutation, and it was like, I was like, all right. That was all we got at the time.
But even that is because of corporate stuff. That's what sucks. It's like,
and they had Fox at the time, didn't they?
No, the thing was, the reason why they even went in this Inhumans direction in the first place was because they didn't want to give, when Fox still had the main rights before Disney acquired them, they didn't want them to get a single dime. So they stopped publishing Fantastic Four.
Wow.
They decided that the Terrigen Mists were suddenly so important in Marvel lore, and maybe all of these characters were Inhumans, even in the comics. And then in the films, they started to say this just because they didn't want Fox getting any money off of Marvel.
They could get money from the comics, even though they have the movie rights.
No, I'm saying they didn't want to do any promo. Because nowadays you can think of the comics as promo over the movies.
That's true.
So they didn't want to do any promo for Fox during this dispute that they were having. And so, the whole Inhumans thing, the whole reason it even took off was because they wanted an alternative mutant framework.
Yeah.
And then when that didn't work out, and then when they acquired Fox, they were like, all right, the mutants are back. But yeah, it's crazy how the corporate wrangling between Disney and Fox and some of these other companies has impacted the storylines.
Yeah.
Really. It's like, that's kind of the thing that I feel like you can't grow up being a comics fan without having, really a strong critique of capitalism because of how capital has ruined this industry.
Or at least be a fan of the X-Men.
Yeah. Well, it's just that we've seen how the business decisions have ruined the good storytelling. We've seen how they've ruined the careers of artists and writers that we love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We've seen how they have hollowed out a lot of properties to turn them into something you can easily adapt to multiple media.
Or when they take from the comics, they don't properly not critique. They don't properly showcase. Like here, they don't. What's it called? They put their names. Like, hey, this was done by this person. This was done by that person. When they're adapting these stories, like, oh, it's Civil War. And it's like, no, it's based on. There's no. I think famously. Wow, I'm not too sure about this, but I think I don't think when they did in the recent Crisis on Infinite Earths for the CW, they brought Brandon Routh to play Kingdom Come. I don't think anybody mentioned it to him. Like, oh, your Superman is gonna be on the CW. He was like, really? Like, yeah, well, I get it. Nobody's gonna tell me about that. Like, no money whatsoever, no residuals, something like that. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, creators have had to, fight to just get their names in the credits of films nowadays because of the stories that are being optioned that they were part of. And it's going to be interesting to see, like, if Marvel historically has treated the people who wrote and drew these characters this way, as expendable and disposable, like the actors and directors and all of these other people in Hollywood can't imagine that they'll fare much better. I mean, what hope do they have? Yeah. Like, it's funny how they're extending
the Russo brothers. They have the Russo brothers.
Yeah, but it's like they're extending Robert Downey Jr.'s lifespan by recasting him.
Yeah.
But eventually, all of these people are going to be put out to pasture.
For
but
sure.
Still, that's comics. It's infinitely regenerating. The whole notion of it is to come up with these characters that can last forever.
They'll be here when you're 80. They'll be here when I'm 40.
It could be. I mean, imagine you could be having this conversation with. You could be my age, having this conversation with someone your current age,
right?
And maybe they'll still be around, but maybe they won't. I like a world where all these comic characters that we watch today are gone. Like, that's the best case scenario. that like.
Everyone's dead.
Everyone's dead. The entire Marvel universe, the DC universe, and they have been allowed to be replaced, refreshed with new characters that a new generation can fall in love with instead of Batman and being Bruce Wayne forever.
Forever, yeah.
And
we're never giving up the mantle to Nightwing.
Or never giving up the mantle. All of these things. Like, there's a conservative impulse in comics because things never change, and so we never grow up. We never grow up either.
Because there's a fraction of people who just don't like change, unfortunately.
Yeah, and
it sucks.
Certainly companies know that they can profit off of the lack of change forever. So, as fans, I think it's our job to insist on innovation and change and dynamic content now that we've moved into this new medium of film. Because we can't have we could recast these actors forever. But already we're starting to see that maybe they're going to add another generation. Maybe we're going to have a Young Avengers film, and then we can have New Avengers, finally, after all these decades.
New Avengers. I have nothing. I don't. I'm young, so I have no idea what the hype is for New Avengers. You can tell me about that if you don't mind, if you want to wrap that up.
Well, I just mean that, now that there's a younger team of younger heroes who is supposed to be legacy heroes who could maybe take the place of their predecessors. Maybe Marvel will, in cinema, do the one thing they never had the courage to do on the comic page, which is let a new generation take over from an older one.
Yeah.
And create new heroes that will lead us into a new vision of what heroism even means.
Yeah. I think a movie that does this well, not to cut you off, I think a movie that does this really well is Thunderbolts. These are not new characters, but they are characters that are not as well known, and they're basically rejects, and they become the new Avengers. Far cry from it was Wolverine, Spider-Man, a bunch of other people, like Spider-Woman, I think it was the New Avengers. These really, really popular heroes, and it's like their whole point is that they're not the Avengers at all. They're but they're just mostly just people who mess up a lot, and even then, they don't fight the bad guy by it's a Thanos level villain for sure, but they don't fight him physically. They save him. It's interesting.
It's an interesting, but even those characters, are pre-existing
Yeah.
characters.
So I know what you mean, though. I would love to see. Me too.
Like, we won't be in a good world until we can just let Bruce Wayne die. Let him go.
They won't.
We
can't do it.
We got to let that vision of justice go also. We need to challenge ourselves to think in new ways. And so we need new heroes. In a way, that's the one thing I do like about the invasion of manga and anime is they gave your generation and a number of people new visions of what it meant to be heroic, new visions of how to explore power, and maybe the responsibility that comes along with it. So I'll be interested to see what the next generation has to pick up. But if they're still trying to, get Steve Rogers out of the ice, then we've got a serious problem.
Oh boy, that we'll see how that goes. But thank you, Diami. I want to appreciate you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank
It's
you
really
for
good.
having me.
Really good talk.
It's great to finally join you.
Yeah, thank you. And it's cool because everyone's had this for a while. Gotten to be on the pod. It's funny. This is my first official like actual professional podcast. Yeah, this is the first one. You have the mantle of being the first one that actually was pretty legit.
I'm glad I could bring legitimacy to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
You brought legitimacy to me as well.
Of course. Thank you guys for watching. You guys have a good one. All right, awesome. Yeah, that was pretty good. Yeah.